Hey everyone, this is Zephyr, with a tutorial for the Automated Evocations module for Foundry VTT by Ripper. With this module, you can summon in actors as parts of spells or abilities, or just from a menu within the game itself. What's great about this is that you can not only bring in those woodland creatures that you've summoned for your party, or that arcane hand, but you can also leverage Token Attacher and Blast Zone to bring in prefabricated structures, like the multi-story deployable fortress from the Bailiwiki Premium Towns module, or this damage overlay that includes a measure template that can be blasted with Blast Zone to damage walls as a part of the attack. In this tutorial, we're going to go over the basics of automated evocations, while also going over these extra synergies with Blast Zone and Token Attacher, and we'll get into how to make your own custom abilities as well. The modules we'll need and cover here are Automated Evocations itself. This is the main module that we're working with, and it has a requirement for Sequencer and Warpgate in order to have the summons and visual effects working. We'll also use advanced macros to take advantage of some of the features in Automated Evocations, and Token Attacher and Blast Zone have great synergy, but they're not actually required for using Automated Evocations. Automated Evocations adds a Companions button at the top of every character sheet in Foundry. If you click on that, you'll open a Manager wizard where you can drag in additional tokens to add to the list of companions. From any actor or token you have selected, you can open this Companions, select a visual effect, click on the token, and it will summon it with that visual effect. These are all completely configurable, and you can even add your own custom animations. While you can bring up this companion manager from any of these tokens, and they all act independently as regular tokens that you've dropped in, you may want to be able to bring up this menu without having to open a creature. So in order to do that, you can simply set up a macro, like the one I'm going to show here, that just tells the game to render out a new companion manager window. All of the macros that we discuss here today can be found within the module, or will be posted in the macros no chat channel on the Bailiwiki Discord. By default, the companions in the manager are tracked by user as opposed to by actor. If you want to change that, you can use the store companions on actor locally macros included in the module. This way you can have an individual actor preloaded with certain companions. This is useful if you're a GM and you want to have an NPC prepared, or you want to give something over to your players. You can return the actor to using the global companions manager by just running the store companions on global for actor macro from the module. Both of these macros can be found in the Automated Evocations macros compendium that's included in the module. You'll also notice that there are AE_companion macros. These are for the advanced features that use advanced macros in order to automatically scale creatures that you summon to your character. So if we import one of those, such as Spiritual Weapon here, then we'll be able to actually use a scaled version of Spiritual Weapon whenever one of our characters summons Spiritual Weapon using companions. Automated Evocations looks for the actors to bring in off of spells by name. Included in the Automated Evocation Summons compendium, we have actors for all of the 5e SRD spells that bring in scaled companions. So I'm bringing in Spiritual Weapon here, and I'm able to summon that with the Companion Manager. While summoning from the Companion Manager is a perfectly valid way to use the module, where things get really interesting is where you can bring in creatures and prefabs via spells. We can see from Spiritual Weapon that the slash has a different damage formula here on this brought in actor. That's going to come into play here when we use a spell and the macro to automatically scale it to our caster. So I have an actor called Spiritual Weapon, and I have an actor that I'm going to bring in the Spiritual Weapon spell. The spell is also by name for Automated Evocations, so you can actually change the spell, and this will not break based on whether or not you have things imported. You just have to have a spell, attack, or feature that matches the name. So when we bring in Spiritual Weapon on this testing character, and we can see in the description that it uses our spellcasting ability modifier as part of the damage, and that we can make a melee spell attack with the weapon. If you remember, when we brought in the earlier Spiritual Weapon token that was not summoned by a spell, it didn't have anything for the damage modifiers. Now I'm going to cast the spell, and when I select Cast Spell, the Companion Manager pops up, but it's only got Spiritual Weapon in it, regardless of if Spiritual Weapon is in my global Companion Manager. And when I open this Spiritual Weapon up, go into the features, and view the details of Slash here, we'll notice that it now has an attack roll bonus of 4, corresponding to my character's proficiency bonus. In this instance, my very beefy level 12 wizard is not very bright and doesn't have a spellcasting ability modifier of greater than 0. These automations are made possible by the Advanced Macros module. And while they are set up for 5e, Automated Evocations is not system specific. It is just only preloaded with content for 5e. Regardless of how you summon companions, there are a lot of great animations that will display when you bring them in. There's a lot of choices, so I'm going to go through them now on screen. With the basics covered, let's return to those automated spells here. Again, on the Spiritual Weapon, we have an attack roll bonus that matches our proficiency bonus and our spellcasting ability modifier. Here we cast it with Intelligence, which has a modifier of 0, so that all checks out. And our damage formula for Spiritual Weapon is 1d8 plus our spellcasting ability modifier. And we can see that's reflected when we roll damage and attacks with this. One important thing to note is that Automated Evocations does not come with scripts that automatically change the description of the items. So these changes based on the caster won't be reflected in the description. You'll notice if I go back in and update my intelligence on my wizard and cast the spell again, that the new actor, when I bring it in, is going to actually reflect those changes and have the proper spellcasting ability modifier added to its damage and attack rolls. And again, we have to go into edit details in order to see this. It's not going to be in the description, but our attack roll bonus is now 9 to reflect an intelligence of 20, and our damage modifier has a +5, as we would expect. Another important thing to note here is that the spellcasting ability matters, at least for 5e here. So when you're in your spell book and you change the spellcasting to Charisma after Charisma has been changed to a 15, and you cast Spiritual Weapon, the new Spiritual Weapon will have stats reflected on the Charisma modifier rather than the Intelligence modifier. So it's up to you and your players to make sure that you're using the appropriate spellcasting abilities when you are actually summoning these creatures using the spells. This is ultimately a good thing, as it keeps the system as flexible as possible without creating conflicts and keeping things system agnostic. And again, while these are pre-configured for 5e, you can set this up for your own spells or other systems. We're going to demonstrate this actually changing based on level with Arcane Hand here. And for Arcane Hand, I went and changed the icons into things from JB2A to kind of reflect how I want things to look. And you'll notice that Arcane Hand has 300 HP out of my 300 max HP. And when we use Clenched Fist, that it reflects the 4d8 force damage that happens. And we can see this reflected in our attack and damage rolls when we're using this spell. We can then also go in and use the spell and summon it at a higher level. I'm just using Argon here to keep things less cluttered. You definitely don't need to use Argon, but I do really like it for 5e and making things simple. You'll notice that I can change the animation on the fly here too. So I can use the magic intro instead of air. Some spells you will specify what the animation is when you're actually setting up the spell, but you don't need to do that for all of them. And we'll see at a higher level, this adds the 2d8 force as expected. When we open up the Arcane Hand spell, and I'll just cast it again to make it easy to see in the chat. Again, we'll notice that the spell specifies the caster's hit point maximum and an increasing amount of damage on its Clenched Fist attack based on the level, and a hit bonus equal to our spellcasting ability modifier as we make melee spell attacks with it. I've again used Charisma here, so it should be a lower number than before. This is powered by the AE companion macro, Arcane Hand, and you'll notice the syntax highlighting, which is a part of the Advanced Macros module, and also what makes this possible. Here, Automated Evocations is able to return the data for the casting creature as well as the summoned creature. Each of these blocks is updating a certain part of the actor. The first block is updating the attributes for the HP max and current HP value. The assigned actor argument there is calling whoever is doing the summoning. If there is not a summoner, then assigned actor won't actually be called, and the hand won't have any updates. Then we go through the Clenched Fist and Grasping Hand attacks, and those calculate the bonus to attack from the summoning creature. You can apply these changes to your own summons with the AE companion macro, and you'll just call whatever the actor is in parentheses, as opposed to the spell it's originating from it. While you can add these custom macros to scale any summons you want, creating those macros is going to be a bit beyond the scope of this video. If you'd like to learn more about that, please let me know in the comments and I'll be happy to do a follow-up on it. Now that we've gone through summoning things via spell, let's get into something really exciting with being able to summon prefab structures. So here I have the Instant Fortress 2 story from the Bailiwiki Permian Maps town module. Just putting it in my Companions Manager, I can then summon it using a lightning animation and drop in my character, and it's immediately as if I just dropped in the prefab from my actor's compendium, but it has a lot more style and panache. I can even add this to a spell or ability. This is a really cool way to add in prefabs. As I mentioned earlier, Automated Evocations is calling actors by name rather than ID. This is nice as it's really robust, and it also allows you to customize things really heavily. So you could use a prefab in place of a standard actor just by changing the name of that prefab. Here I'm going to bring out my spiritual weapon from earlier, and we'll notice it still has that masked man placeholder image supplied by the module. Again, this is to keep things flexible so that you can change it to suit whatever your needs are for your campaign. Here, I'm just going to go select a token that I want, or a portrait, for it, and I'm going to use JB2A's free assets, and they actually have some images and animations for Spiritual Weapon itself. So I'm just going to use those and stick with the flaming maul icon for the Spiritual Weapon here. Update that, and then I go to my prototype token and change the image path to the animation that I want. This isn't specific to JB2A or anything else that you want. I'm just using this as an example. Note that we're also setting the defaults here for every time this gets summoned. So I can choose whether things are displayed, whether the token's disposition is friendly or hostile. You could also actually use wildcard images to vary up the tokens if you wanted. And we'll see if I drop this in, this token behaves as expected. Then if I go in and use Spiritual Weapon, again, because this is going to be using names, you'll see that it is updated and everything. And this would be true if I brought in just a whole new Spiritual Weapon or if I customized it. So that's something to keep in mind as you're using these different spells, is you can always change things around and switch between your animations, icons, and token preferences. We've looked at summoning companions through the Companions Manager and through the included 5e SRD spells. Now let's take a look at creating our own new spell. I really like the ice animation, so I want to make a Summon Ice Methods spell. You saw a little teaser for those earlier, and the description and the details don't really matter here. The spell that I'm making is just summoning the entities. I'm not worried about anything scaling or doing any damage, so I'm just putting in a description that works for me right now. You can flesh this out as much or as little as you want. It all depends on what you need. Then I've brought in these ice methods from the 5e SRD, and I'm going to rename them something to Summon, because that way I can set up the prototype token to be friendly rather than hostile. I've decided to go with a dash here just to make syntax for a macro we'll need later a lot easier. And again, opening up that prototype token, I want to make sure it's friendly, because this will be a summon. And I'm going to make some of these attributes fit the visibility that I want. When all that's set, it's time to actually make a macro. In order to add custom spells, we need to edit our game settings. You'll notice in this add cannon shot macro I've set up that we call the game settings, and we're looking specifically for AE consts in the custom auto spell section. Then I'm going to add in data with the exact name of my ability, the creature I'm summoning, the number, and the animation. Then I will append that to my data. It's really important that we're reading the old data so that we don't overwrite it. Otherwise, we'll end up losing all of our previous custom spells. If we pull open Cannon Shot over here, you'll see that's what I used for the demo. Now I'm going to make a new macro, and I'm just going to copy and paste everything, making sure that this is a script macro and executing it as a GM. I like to just use add summon ice methods. You can use whatever nomenclature you want as long as it makes sense to you. I'm going to copy and paste that over. I'm then going to make sure I have the right names for everything. I'm going to move the summon ice methods item over into my items directory, so it's no longer just on my actors inventory. And I want to paste that in the data tag for the entity that's going to house our spell information. So again, that needs to match our spell or ability that's using it. I want my animation to be ice, and I want to make sure I'm copying the exact name of what I'm summoning. See, before I used the blast crater. Now I'm going to use the ice method we made with summon, and I can change the number to 4. Again, to break this down a little bit, we want to make sure that we're calling this previous section of our game settings and getting all the information from it. So that's what this first line of the macro is doing. And then the second part is going to be appending the summon ice method entity to the data that we just pulled. And the final section will be writing it back. It's really crucial that we're adding this as opposed to overwriting the existing data. Once we have all that set, we'll be able to execute the macro. Before that, I want to double check on the animations. I have ice here. Animation is technically optional. As you saw in other spells, we were able to change it on the fly. Here, I want to specifically use ice, but I want to make sure I have the name right. If you want to find out the names, go into your console with F12, use aeconst.animationfunctions, and you'll see the full list of the different options. All of these items in purple, this kind of like bright magenta maroon color, are the ones you can use. So air, darkness, energy 1. And I'm glad I did that because it turns out it's not ice, it's ice 1. So now that I have that, I'm going to execute the macro. I can just click on it, or I can edit and select save. And from there, you actually need to refresh your page. So I'm going to activate this scene. So this is the one I come back to, and refresh. Then when I double click on my actor, left clicking instead of right clicking this time, and go into my spellbook and select summon ice methods. And I cast the spell, you see ice methods pop up, and we have this beautiful ice animation, and all 4 show up. So we've successfully added our custom spell effect with these ice methods. And they indeed say summon, although the full name doesn't show up, which is actually pretty nice in this instance. And they're all displaying as friendly with that nice blue. Now, if you want to make sure that you have a spell setting actually imported, you can use a macro to call the game settings. It's really similar to the one we just did. Basically, we're going to do that first line of finding out what those settings are. And then instead of doing any kind of edits, we're going to print that to the console with the console.log function. And from there, you can see we have these 3 items in the custom auto spell section. We have test weapon, cannon shot, and summon ice methods. Those correspond to 3 different custom spells or abilities that I have set up. And we can open those up and see everything that they do. So in test weapon, we can see that we have the Fire Big by Gorgon being called, etc. So this is a great way to double check your work and make sure things have actually saved. If you see your custom spell in here, but it's not working, try refreshing. Let's say after we've looked at this, we've determined that we don't want something. So I'm going to remove my test weapon here. I called basically the same macro from before, except now I'm going to use delete data, and I'm going to specify which entity I want to get rid of here. So again, you can use that console log for the game settings, and then you can just copy and paste the exact name of what you want to get rid of. Then we'll just do delete data, and these brackets are going to tell it to only delete the section under that item, and it will completely erase the test weapon, and we will rewrite that to our game settings. And when I execute the macro, then look at that game settings again and print it to the console, you'll notice that now test weapon is gone. This is a great way if you have cluttered spells or you want to change a name of a spell, this is how you would get rid of it. Really important to make sure that you have this information in case you want to change the names, because again, everything is done by name. If you change your spell or feature that calls the summons and change its name, then it will no longer work, and you'll have to make a new version of that in your game settings, and you probably don't want a bunch adding up. Now let's take a look at another great synergy here with Automated Evocations, and that's Blast Zone, also by Ripper. And I'm making just an absolute mess of these walls over here. And from there, I'm going to go into my measure templates and make a big old measure template, and maybe size that down a bit to demonstrate more. And when I bring it down and reposition it over the walls, I will then be able to open the measure template config, and I will actually see a new icon that says Blast. If I click on that, there's a confirmation box, because you can't undo this. You'll notice that all of these walls have been blown up. They've been broken where they intersected with the measure template, and they won't break anywhere else. So this is a really cool utility for adding in destruction. I've also created a macro that lets me call the template that I'm hovering over, as you can't hold a selection on a measured template for some reason in Foundry. Then I'm specifying a new blast zone, detonating it, and then deleting the template. So if I draw in this new cone-shaped template, hover over it, and execute my macro, it will detonate and disappear, and you'll see that those walls are still blasted away. The application for this is to make a prefab like I did with that blast crater earlier. So we'll go through a really basic setup for that. Here I'm going to make a fireball. So something that just has a incendiary remain, and you can use whatever names you want for your token. Here I've gone with fireball, and I want to make sure it's hidden so that the control token doesn't show up for my players. You can use any image for your token. Maybe you want to use the actual damage pattern as a token. It's up to you. And I'm going to find a texture I like here. And in this case, I'm going to end up grabbing some animated assets from the Gorgon, just to show that this does work with animated assets as well. And I really want to emphasize that these tiles don't actually matter when it comes to you making this. This process is exactly the same if you're using these animated fire assets as if you're using a flat image that has some soot over it. If you're dropping in a house, whatever it is, it doesn't really matter what images you're using. So don't worry too much about exactly where I'm getting these tiles. Just use the artwork that you want for this. I'm hemming and hawing a bit over my art selection, but it's not a big deal here. All right, and when I'm happy with the art part of it, just to demonstrate, if I go into my actors tool, there is a links of a chain icon, and that will open up my token attacher menu. And I'm just going to use this select box that lets me drag everything on all layers. And you'll see that I've now attached my tiles. You can also add lighting and walls, anything you want. In this case, adding walls probably isn't the best call if you're going to be detonating a blast zone, but that's up to you. I want to set up a torch here, and this lighting phase is completely optional. I just want to illustrate what's possible. After I have everything else set, I'm ready to put in this measured template. This is not something you'd normally see on a prefab, but it works really well with automated evocations. So I've set up a stock distance of 15 feet, and again, I'll go back into my token attacher menu and use the select all box to grab that new light and measure template. I always like to move my token at least left or right once and at least up or down once as well. And then I'm going to create a new character. Moving it in on both axes helps make sure that everything is attached and everything has registered properly. Sometimes you can get strange attachment behavior if you don't do that. Then when I have my new actor, I want to go into prototype token and hit assign token. And you'll notice that it's updated to say fireball and neutral, which means we've got it saved in. So anytime we drag fireball in from our actors directory, we'll get this exact same prefab. So it's a really quick rundown of making prefabs with token attacher if you're not already familiar. Now I can go into my companion manager and I can add the fireball to the companion manager. And if I select fire and everything, that will be my default selection. And I can summon this just like any other actor or any other prefab by clicking on it and then clicking on my canvas. Now let's show it off with Blast by drawing in these extra walls. Notice that the lighting is a bit obscured. And if I go into measure template so I can hover properly, I can hit blast and I can blow up the walls. And you'll notice that the walls are gone. After I blasted the template, I can delete it. One thing to note is if you blast a template from a token attach or prefab, you will break the prefab. So you would need to reattach things if you were going to move this fireball afterwards. Since we're using the blast to damage things, we probably aren't going to move our damaged prefab very often, but it's something to keep in mind. Now I'm just going to demonstrate really quick with my macro again. And once more, this is going to check for the template that I'm hovering over. I will have to be in my templates tool to be able to actually hover over it. Otherwise, it'll give an error that it couldn't find a template. And you can see I can still detonate it. It doesn't matter if it's a part of a prefab. All right. Again, this has been Zephyr with the tutorial on Automated Evocations by Ripper. If you're interested in learning more about this, please let me know in the comments what questions you still have and what else I can cover for you with this really flexible and powerful module. I've been really excited at the potential this has for including traps and interesting encounters such as these cannons that can blow holes in walls. Let me know what you would like to see in future videos and in future modules. Thanks again for watching, and have a good one.